Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be a request by Spakmatooth. Pardon me for the pronunciation, but he's asked a question, maybe something about temples and orientations to the east from sunrise on the spring equinox day using a Maltese cross or the Knights Templar. I will be grateful for the vlog. Well, I can sort of answer some of those questions, or at least add some questions to it and give some info. I'll put a playlist in the description because this has to do with the Great Pyramid and 30 degrees, the Templar cross, units of measure, ancient timekeeping, how the second, the meter, the pendulum all join together, but especially in regards to some Masonic connections. So we see that like a bought structure of Freemasonry if we focus up on this section, so where we have the York Rite. So we have the Scottish Rite with 33, we'll come back to that. We also have the York Rite of 13 steps, and there we have it. The 13th is the Order of the Knights Templar, and the Order of the Knights of Malta. So that's the 13th, and that's the 12th step, and you can see this, the geometry underlying it. Notice that the Order of a Red Cross is the 7-pointed star, the heptagon. But, okay, so orientations to the east. And, well, firstly, to the east is to the rising sun, which is, like obvious, in the morning comes warmth, comes life, the rising sun. Also consider it for the sport of orienteering, where you have to, for instance, run through the bush or even in an urban setting, but where there would be markers and you have a set of instructions, how many degrees, what direction you go, how long you have to run. You would have to find a marker and move along, but that's orienteering, and here's part of the interesting connections there. So orienteering, the way you orient yourself, that's even a phrase, to orient yourself in a certain direction. So just down the road from me, I'm not too far from Liverpool here in Sydney, we have the Masonic Centre. The Hume Highway, so the Liverpool Masonic Centre, that's what you'll see if you move along the Hume Highway. Now the Hume Highway was originally the Great Southern Road, was renamed to the Hume Highway, named after Hamilton Hume, who was part of the original team of explorers, surveyors who opened and surveyed the Great Southern Road, now known as the Hume Highway. It's the major road between the two biggest cities in Australia, Sydney and Melbourne. Hamilton Hume was a Freemason. Governor Lachlan Macquarie was also a Freemason, and he was the one who ordered the expedition. He was very important in setting up. Governor Macquarie in 1810 founded Liverpool on the 7th of November, the 7th day of the 11th month. He also set up the 66 feet wide road structures, which goes back to, if you've been watching in regards to pendulums and the Nagunta's chain. Also the width of the entire road of 66 feet, but the carriageway itself is 42 feet, which is a 7:11 ratio, which is the same as the Great Pyramid. I covered that earlier, gone through the geometry of it, but if you're familiar with the 7:11 Gunter's chain connecting to the pendulum, which is a harmony point between multiple sets of measurement, half of 66 feet is 33. So here, the Department of Lands Building, Bridge Street, Sydney, by a very important architect, James Barnett. He did so many very important buildings right across New South Wales and other parts of Australia. Huge amounts of work, but on the statues there is Hamilton Hume. So now there's another little connection here, because we have in other buildings of James Barnett, and this is an ancient tradition where we'll have 3 levels. And so the lowest level has the Doric order of architecture, which is those simple design. Then we have the Ionic, where we see those swirls. And on the 3rd level, we have the Corinthian. Now this is a nice connection because, again, Freemasonry. So the 3 Greek orders of ancient architecture are the Doric, the Ionic and the Corinthian. And it's still preserved now in the Masons tradition. Now also notice the sun rays. This is an important feature, the sun and the moon, but also the sun, because you orientate yourself to the east. And we also have the 3 Doric columns. Another interesting point when you're trying to decipher these things, ESW, east, south and west. The boards have been skewed, so it's not north at the top and south at the bottom, as you might expect. This is an interesting feature as well. But going back to, so the Colosseum, this is so the three Greek orders of architecture, but the Colosseum's at least the oldest building I know where we have the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian stacked on top of one another. Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian being so important to Freemasonry. Again, the sun. Notice east is to the top, south, west, and north. This is an important feature. We'll come back to this, but Athanasius Kircher, very enigmatic, very curious figure, published many books, Jesuit, a lot of stuff in regards to him. This is from his book Universal Music, and without giving too much away, because there's someone I know who's doing some amazing research and hopefully will be available soon. It's really going to probably be a game changer. But if you need to think about to decipher this type of imagery, you need to, these little details that count. You need to adjust things, but I'm sure someone knows what he's talking about in regards to that. But back to the Liverpool Masonic Centre, east, south, and west. Okay, so the Hume Highway is basically running north, and so what most people would think is the main entrance would be on the western side, but that's not correct. So north, east. What we really have, the true entrance is here off to the side where we see the twin pillars, and you can even see the compass and square on the floor. The true door faces east in this aspect, so Mason's board with the twin pillars, sun and the moon, the all-seeing eye. It's very important that these go to the east. Now the body for females in Masonry, one of the associated bodies is the Order of the Eastern Star, which is another link if you're... I'll put these links in the description. There's a few interesting things in regards to this because, for instance, the first of these two orientations can be called polar, in contrast to the second, which is solar. So polar, north-south, the solar, east and west, the rising and the setting sun. Now, those links will be in the description, so again you can see how the north, east, south and west should be, but how now it's been reversed there. Now if we go back to those boards, tracing board again, east, south and west, how they're skewed, and you need to incorporate that. Also on this particular page where he's talking about polar and solar, he also points out, we see here, so that's a square, and that's a rectangle which is twice the square. This is an important feature because here he mentions the square root of 2 and the square root of 5. Your typical drawing set will have a 45, 45, 90 degree set square, which gives you 1, 1, and the square root of 2. This also applies to, for instance, the House of Temple in Washington, where it's this ancient design pattern goes back to Roman times, ad quadratum, by the square. So just like the compass and square of Masonry, this is the House of the Temple, Washington. So again, we see the compass and the square ad quadratum. Again, I'll put this link in. There's, so you can just, these are good search terms now. Also, in the series I've been doing on the pyramid, I began with the concept of Vitruvian man. This is an illustration by Leonardo da Vinci. It's based on this ancient book, textbook on architecture, ancient machines by Vitruvius, and without symmetry and proportion, there can be no principles in the design of any temple. That is, if there is no precise relationship between its members, as in the case of a well-shaped man. Man is the measure of all things, the circle and the square, important features in there. Now, that was the square root of 2 would be the diagonal. This diagonal would be the square root of 5. The golden number is 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2. That's phi. And so this is another aspect in there, and I'll get into that, just setting down some things. So ad quadratum by the square, the adjacent temples facing to the east, and then we bring in another important feature, ad Orientem, or to the east. To orient yourself, orienteering, as in oriental, and it's now a bit of a dirty word, but the orient is eastern, occident is western. Ad Orientem, to the east, all the lodges will arrange themselves internally and also tend to have the main door, the true door, to the east, facing the rising sun. It's also very important in the design of most churches, so ad Orientem, to the east. So during the Mass, the parishioners should be always facing east, but there are certain important parts in the Mass where the priest will turn his back face the altar, and he'll be facing east as well. Okay, now, so for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, also the altar, you're facing east when you're facing the altar. Here's like the Catholics in Florida petitioned to get ad Orientem restored in their parish, but after their bishop ordered to stop. Also, just again, the wiki page will give you some of the early descriptions of why churches would be facing to the east, but this is pre-Christian, very, very pre-Christian. So you can pause and read through some of those. It has to do with, that link will be in the description as well for further reading. Now, for instance, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, again, it's an easterly direction. Now, it's worth noting, so I put the Templar cross over the top, and it seems to have a 30 degree from true east, which would apply to, for instance, the Great Pyramid is almost 30 degrees north. There's you could say it's exactly 30 degrees north, but there's a little bit of stuff to describe there. But the pendulum of 1 second can be swung no more than 30 degrees. Riccioli, Jesuit, was one of the first people to really publish on this. Now back to ancient Rome. So we'll see the Colosseum. That too is arranged to the east. The Parthenon in Athens, also orientated to the east. The eastern pediment, so inside the Parthenon was a giant statue of Athena. The eastern pediment described the birth of Athena. Now it's of course broken. You have to see what's remaining of it. You have to go to the British Museum. But this was a very important feature as well. Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan. Now both the Parthenon and Mohenjo-Daro, there are people who suggest that it is arranged to Taurus, or a particular star in Taurus, Aldebaran, but also the Pleiades is one of the star clusters there in Taurus constellation. Now, of course, the Great Sphinx of Egypt is essentially perfectly to the east, and the bases of the pyramids as well will be arranged east-west. As also on the equinox, there is a famous photo of a shadow splitting the southern face of the pyramid, because the Great Pyramid is 8-sided. But that's an interesting question, because that photo was taken, and there's no photos of it done otherwise. So, but anyway, the Great Sphinx, this too, is part of his very ancient tradition of arranging to the east, the setting sun, the rising sun, which of course is not too, sort of obvious in that sense, if you want to put it that way. But so Masons, back to the Doric, Ionic and Corinthian. And again, the Colosseum. Now I'm bringing this up because back to Athanasius Kircher, amongst his books, Oedipus Egyptiacus, his very early book on Egyptian history, basically translations of Manetho. Also in his book, Universal Music, the Doric and the Ionic as musical modes, and his connection between Isis and music. But another important connection there, I'll put the link to a full video in the description. He describes P, he's describing P, well, essentially fertile, childbearing, fertility, and irrigated land. Even Isis is stepping in the water. And this is, well, irrigation, famous, whether it's Egypt, Mesopotamia, South America, where we see these pails, or these handbags as they're called. That's one of the interesting connections there. He also, for instance, said Oedipus Egyptiacus by Kircher, where he does the monad, which is I'll bring that up because also in there in regards to alchemy and the alchemists of that time, you notice the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, and there we also see where Orient, east, and west is reversed, very similar to these other patterns. And there's, I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do that. You're going to have to look up for yourself, for those who really want to go in, because I would just say that probably a lot of these alchemical stuff that you'll find on YouTube or typical blogs, well, look a little bit deeper, I would suggest. There's some in regards to math and astronomy, there's a lot of actually information in here. It's embedded in ancient structures, going back through time, cross cultures, cross religions, across the world. So to orient oneself, orient to the east, it's even in our vernacular now, and that has a lot to do with the east, the rising sun. I'll do some more on this, but just as an intro, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.